Sarah Martinez stood at the kitchen window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears she refused to shed anymore. The coffee in her hands had gone cold an hour ago, but she held onto the mug anyway, needing something solid to anchor herself to reality. Behind her, the house felt hollow despite being filled with memories of better times. The front door opened with that familiar creak that David had promised to fix 3 years ago. Heavy footsteps moved through the hallway, and she knew without turning that he was avoiding looking at her. This had become their dance over the past 6 months, careful steps around each other, measured distances, conversations that skimmed the surface of what really needed saying. "You're home late again," Sarah said softly, not accusingly, just stating fact. She heard him stop behind her, could feel the weight of whatever excuse he was preparing to deliver. Conference call ran over. "Tokyo time zones, you know how it is." David's voice carried that practiced tone he used when he wanted to end a conversation before it began. "I grabbed dinner on the way home." Sarah finally turned around, and for a moment she saw the man she'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. Tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that used to light up when he saw her. Now those same eyes looked tired, distant, like he was already somewhere else even when standing in their kitchen. "Mrs. Chun from next door asked about you today," Sarah said, setting her mug on the counter. Her husband just retired, and they're planning that trip to Italy they've been talking about forever. She wondered if we had any travel plans. David loosened his tie, a gesture she once found attractive but now seemed like armor being removed after battle. "Work's crazy right now. Maybe next year?" "You said that last year." "And the year before?" The words slipped out before Sarah could stop them, carrying more pain than she intended. "Sarah, please." "Not tonight. I'm exhausted." She watched him move toward the stairs, each step taking him further away from her, from them, from whatever they used to be. "David, wait." He paused at the bottom of the staircase, one hand on the banister, but didn't turn around. "When did we stop talking?" she asked. Really talking, not just logistics about bills and schedules and who's picking up groceries. "When did we become strangers living in the same house?" "We're not strangers." His voice was quiet, almost defeated. "We're just tired." "I'm not tired, David. I'm lonely." "There's a difference." This time he did turn, as she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. For a moment, she thought he might say something real, something that acknowledged the growing canyon between them. Instead, he rubbed his forehead and said, "Can we talk about this tomorrow?" "I have an early meeting." "There's always an early meeting." "Or a late meeting. Or weekend work that can't wait." Sarah's voice remained steady, but she felt something breaking inside her chest. "Do you remember what tomorrow is?" David's face went blank. That careful expression he wore when he knew he'd forgotten something important but wasn't sure what. "It's our anniversary," she said simply. 15 years married. 18 years together. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Sarah watched realization dawn in his eyes, followed quickly by what looked like guilt and frustration with himself. "Sarah, I'm sorry, I don't." She held up a hand. Suddenly too tired for apologies that wouldn't change anything. "I made dinner reservations at Milano's. 7 o'clock. The same place you proposed." "I'll be there," he said quickly. "Of course I'll be there." But Sarah could already see him calculating, wondering what meetings he'd have to reschedule, what calls he'd have to postpone. She used to love how dedicated he was to his work, how he provided for them. Built a life that let her pursue her art while feeling secure. Now that same dedication felt like a wall between them. "I finished a new painting today," she said, changing the subject because the anniversary conversation felt too heavy. Too loaded with expectations, neither of them seemed able to meet anymore. David's shoulders relaxed slightly, grateful for safer ground. "Yeah? What's it of?" "A woman standing at a crossroads." Sarah smiled sadly. "Two paths diverging in different directions. I haven't decided which way she's going to go yet." Something in David's expression shifted, became more alert. "Crossroads?" "Sometimes I think we paint what we need to see," Sarah said. What we need to understand about ourselves. Sarah, dot dot dot. David started, then stopped, as if the words he needed were locked somewhere he couldn't reach. Go get some sleep, she said gently. Tomorrow's a big day. He nodded and headed upstairs, leaving Sarah alone in the kitchen with her cold coffee and the sound of rain against windows. She thought about the painting upstairs in her studio, the woman frozen at the moment of decision. For weeks, Sarah had stared at that canvas, unable to add the final brushstrokes that would send the figure down one path or another, maybe because she wasn't ready to decide which path was right. The next morning brought sunshine, as if the weather was mocking their situation by being absolutely perfect for their anniversary. Sarah woke up alone, which had become normal. David's side of the bed was already made, coffee pot empty, newspaper gone. A note on the kitchen counter in his familiar handwriting. Emergency at the office. Rain check on lunch? Looking forward to dinner. Love, D. Sarah stared at the note for a long time, thinking about how they used to write each other love letters. Real letters, pages long, full of dreams and promises and silly inside jokes. Now their communication had been reduced to logistics and scheduling conflicts. She spent the afternoon in her studio, working on a commission piece, a portrait of the Henderson family for their holiday card. It was safe work, pleasant work, the kind that paid well and didn't challenge her too deeply. But her eyes kept drifting to the Crossroads painting. The woman still frozen in her moment of choice. At 5:30, Sarah began getting ready for dinner. She chose the blue dress David had always loved, the one he'd bought her for their 5th anniversary. It still fit perfectly, still made her feel beautiful, but when she looked in the mirror, she wondered if he would even notice. The phone rang at 6:15. Sarah? David's voice sounded stressed, harried. Background noise suggested he was still at the office. I'm so sorry, but this Peterson deal is falling apart. I need to stay and don't, Sarah said quietly, cutting him off. The word came out calm, almost peaceful, which surprised both of them. Don't what? Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't make promises you won't keep. She sat down on the edge of their bed, still wearing the blue dress, still holding on to hope that was growing thinner by the minute. I can be there by 8, David said. Maybe 8:30 at the latest. We can still salvage. You don't have to care, she whispered, the words coming from some deep, honest place she'd been protecting for months. About dinner. About our anniversary. About us. You don't have to pretend anymore that this matters to you. The silence on the other end was deafening. Sarah could hear papers rustling, computer keys clicking, the sounds of David's real priority. Sarah, that's not fair, he said finally. Of course I care. You matter to me. We matter to me. When? The question came out sharper than she intended. When do we matter? Between conference calls? During commercial breaks? In the 5 minutes before you fall asleep? You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. There's a difference. Sarah heard David sigh, that frustrated sound he made when conversations went places he didn't want to go. Can we please talk about this when I get home? I promise I'll leave here in an hour and we'll figure this out. Will we? Or will we just have the same conversation we've been having for months, where you promise things will change, and I pretend to believe you, and nothing actually gets better? Things can get better, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. We just need to get through this busy period at work. And then there's always going to be a busy period. Sarah stood up, moving to the window again, watching neighbors come home from work. Families gathering for dinner, couples walking dogs together. Normal life happening all around their increasingly abnormal marriage. There's always going to be one more deal, one more client, one more crisis that takes priority. My work provides for us. It gives us this house, your studio, the freedom for you to paint without worrying about money. I thought that mattered to you. It did matter. It does matter. But somewhere along the way, providing for us became more important than being with us. Being with me. Sarah heard voices in the background, someone calling David's name urgently. I have to take this, he said. But Sarah, I love you. You know that, right? I love you, and this is temporary, and things will get better. I know you love me, Sarah said softly, but I'm not sure you like me anymore. I'm not sure you even see me. What does that mean? It means ... Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of months of loneliness, of conversations that never happened, of a marriage that had slowly become a business partnership. It means I'm going to Milano's tonight. Table for two at 7 o'clock, same booth where you proposed 18 years ago. I'm going to order the wine we had on our first date, and I'm going to remember what it felt like when we couldn't wait to see each other. I'll be there, David said. But Sarah could hear him shuffling papers, his attention already divided. No, you won't. And that's okay. It tells me everything. Sarah, what are you saying? David's voice carried a tremor she hadn't heard in years, like he was finally understanding that this wasn't another argument they could smooth over with apologies and good intentions. Sarah set down her paintbrush and finally turned to face her husband. He looked smaller somehow, standing in the doorway of her studio in his expensive suit, tie loosened, hair slightly messed from running his hands through it. She could see the exact moment when he noticed the suitcase sitting by her easel. I'm saying that I went to dinner tonight. Alone, on our anniversary. And for the first time in months, I wasn't angry or hurt or disappointed. Sarah's voice remained calm, which seemed to unnerve David more than if she'd been shouting. I was relieved? Relieved? David stepped further into the room, his eyes moving from the changed painting to the packed suitcase to Sarah's face, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. Relieved that I didn't have to wait. Didn't have to check my phone every 10 minutes? Didn't have to make excuses to the waiter or pretend everything was fine when it isn't. Sarah sat down in the chair where she did her detailed work, suddenly exhausted by the effort of pretending for so long. I ordered wine and dinner for one, and it felt more honest than anything we've shared in months. David moved closer, and Sarah could smell his cologne mixed with stress sweat and the lingering scent of office coffee. Sarah, I know tonight was bad timing, but the Peterson account represents millions of dollars. If we lose it, we won't lose anything, David. You won't lose anything. Your job, your accounts, your success, that's all still going to be there tomorrow. Sarah looked at the painting where the woman was now clearly walking toward a distant horizon. But I think we've already lost us. That's not true. David knelt down beside her chair, taking her hands in his. His were cold, slightly shaking. We're going through a rough patch, but that's normal. All couples go through this. We just need to communicate better, maybe see a counselor. When? The question stopped him mid-sentence. When would we see a counselor? Between your conference calls and client dinners and weekend emergencies? Would we schedule our marriage between your other appointments? David's face flushed, and she could see him calculating his calendar, probably realizing that she was right. I could make time. I want to make time. You've been saying that for 2 years. Remember when we talked about taking that trip to Ireland? You said we'd go after the Morrison deal closed. Then it was after the quarterly reports. Then after the merger. Then after the Peterson account. Sarah gently pulled her hands free. The accounts keep coming. David, there's always going to be another deal, another crisis. Another reason why our marriage has to wait. My work isn't just about money, David said, standing up and beginning to pace the small studio. I'm building something, creating financial security for us, for our future. I thought you understood that. I did understand it. I supported it. I was proud of you for climbing the ladder, for becoming a partner, for earning respect in your field. Sarah watched him move around the room like a caged animal, touching her art supplies, her paintings, the evidence of the life she'd built while he'd been building his career. But somewhere along the way, your work stopped being something you did to support our life together and became your entire life. I became the person who happened to live in the same house as your success. David stopped pacing and turned to face her. That's not how I see you. How do you see me? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah watched David's face as he struggled to answer, and she realized he genuinely didn't know. When was the last time he'd really looked at her, asked about her dreams, shown interest in her art beyond polite inquiries? "You're my wife," he said finally. "You're beautiful and talented and supportive, and I love you." "Those are things I am in relation to you," Sarah said gently. "But who am I? What do I want? What makes me happy? What am I afraid of? What have I been working on in this studio for the past 6 months?" David looked around the room as if the answer might be written on the walls. His eyes moved over her paintings, landscapes, portraits, abstract pieces, exploring themes of isolation and connection. How many times had he been in this room without really seeing what she was creating? He started, then stopped. "I don't know." "I should know, but I don't." The admission hung between them like a bridge they'd burned without realizing it. Sarah felt a mixture of sadness and relief that they were finally being honest about how far apart they'd drifted. "I've been painting about loneliness," she said. "About what it feels like to live with someone who loves you but doesn't see you. About the difference between being cared for and being known." She gestured toward the paintings around the room. "Every piece I've done this year has been about trying to understand how two people can share a bed, a house, a life, and still be strangers to each other." David sank into the small couch she kept for when she needed to step back from her work. "I didn't know you felt lonely. I'm here. We live together, we eat together, we eat in front of the television while you answer emails. We live in the same house but follow completely different schedules. We share a bed, but you're usually asleep before I come upstairs and gone before I wake up." Sarah's voice remained steady, factual. "Being in the same space isn't the same as being together. I can change that. We can have dinner without phones, set aside time to really talk." "David, stop." Sarah held up a hand. "Please stop making promises. Stop trying to negotiate your way out of this like it's a business deal you can salvage with the right offer." "Then what do you want me to do?" For the first time, David's voice cracked, showing the fear underneath his controlled exterior. "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." "That's the problem," Sarah said sadly. "You want me to tell you how to fix this because that's how you approach everything. Identify the problem. Create a solution, implement the fix. But this isn't a client crisis or a budget shortfall. This is about two people who've forgotten how to be curious about each other." Sarah stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where they'd planned to build their life together. "Do you remember when we first moved here? We used to take walks after dinner talking about everything. You'd tell me about your day not because I asked, but because you wanted to share it with me. I'd show you my paintings when they were half finished because I valued your opinion. We can do that again." "When?" Sarah turned back to face him. "Tonight you missed our anniversary dinner for a work emergency. Last week you canceled lunch because a client was in town. The week before that you worked through the weekend because of some deadline. When exactly are we going to have these conversations?" David was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him finally understanding the impossible math of their situation. There weren't enough hours in the day for him to maintain his current level of professional commitment and rebuild their marriage. Something would have to give, and they both knew what his choice would be. "The Peterson account closes next month," he said finally. "After that, things will calm down. And then there will be the next account, and the next promotion, and the next crisis." Sarah moved to her suitcase and picked it up. "I'm not asking you to choose between your career and me, David. I'm just finally accepting that you already chose." "Sarah, please." David stood up, desperation creeping into his voice. "Don't do this. Don't throw away 15 years because I'm going through a busy period at work. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm trying to save what's left of myself before I disappear completely." Sarah headed toward the door, then paused. 3 months ago, I sold a painting to a gallery in Portland. It was the first piece I've sold in over a year, and I was so excited that I called you immediately. Do you remember what you said? David's face went pale, and Sarah could see that he had no memory of the conversation. "You said that's great, honey, but I'm walking into a meeting. Can we celebrate later?" Sarah's smile was sad but not bitter. I never brought it up again because you never asked. That's when I knew we were in real trouble, when I stopped expecting you to show up for the good moments, not just the bad ones. I'm a horrible husband, David said quietly. I know that, but I can do better. We can get counseling, I can cut back on work hours. We can take that trip to Ireland. Too late for that, Sarah replied. Not with anger, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally accepted a painful truth. The words stopped David mid-sentence. He stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language, as if the concept of too late didn't exist in his world of deals and negotiations and second chances. What do you mean, too late? He asked. It's never too late to fix things. People work through marriage problems all the time. Some people do, Sarah agreed. People who still want the same things, who still have enough connection left to build on. But David, we don't even know each other anymore. You don't know about my art, my dreams, my fears. I don't know about your hopes beyond the next promotion or what you think about when you're not focused on work. We can learn those things again, can we? Or would it just be another project for you to manage between meetings? Sarah shifted the suitcase to her other hand. I've been thinking about this for months, David. This isn't. 6 months later, David stood in the empty studio where Sarah's paintings used to hang, holding a letter that had arrived that morning with no return address but handwriting he would recognize anywhere. His hands shook slightly as he unfolded the single sheet of paper. Her words written in the careful script she used when she wanted to make sure every letter was perfect. David, I hope you're well. I wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about our last conversation, about the things we said and the things we should have said years ago. I also wanted you to know that I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm learning things about myself I'd forgotten I wanted to know. David walked to the window where Sarah used to stand, looking out at the neighborhood that felt different now that he experienced it alone. The Chuns next door had left for their trip to Italy, and he'd found himself oddly envious of their easy partnership. The way Mr. Chun had proudly shown him photos of the itinerary Mrs. Chun had planned for them. I'm in Portland now. As it turns out, the gallery connection led to more opportunities than I expected. I have a small studio apartment near the river, and I can see mountains from my easel. I paint every day now, not just when I have time between other obligations, but as my primary purpose. It's strange and wonderful and sometimes scary to build a life around. What brings me joy instead of around someone else's schedule? David sank into the chair Sarah used to occupy for hours, working on pieces he'd barely glanced at while rushing between conference calls. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was finally sitting still in her studio after she was gone, finally paying attention to her space. After she no longer needed him to notice, the Peterson account had closed successfully 2 weeks after Sarah left. The celebration dinner he'd worked toward for months had felt hollow without her there to share it. He'd called her sister's number that night, wanting to tell Sarah about the commission he'd earned. But Lisa had gently told him Sarah needed more time. I want you to know that I don't regret our years together. We built something beautiful for a long time, and I learned so much about love and partnership and compromise from being with you. I also learned about losing myself, which wasn't your fault or mine, but something that happened gradually while we weren't paying attention to each other. David had indeed tried to pay attention after Sarah left, but he'd discovered how difficult it was to change patterns that had become automatic. He worked late because that's what he'd always done. He ate dinner in front of the television because cooking for one felt pointless. He answered emails at all hours because silence in the house made him restless and sad. 3 months after Sarah left, David had finally taken the vacation days he'd been accumulating for years. Not for a romantic getaway or business conference, but simply because he'd realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd spent a full day without thinking about work. The forced break had been harder than he'd expected. Without meetings and deadlines and client crises to focus on, he'd been left alone with the realization of how empty his life had become outside of his career. I've been seeing a therapist here, someone who specializes in helping people rediscover their identities after major life changes. She asked me recently if I missed you or if I missed being married. It took me weeks to understand the difference, but I think I finally do. I miss you, your laugh, your intelligence. The way you used to tell stories about your coworkers, how excited you'd get about solving complex problems. But I don't miss being married to your schedule during those empty vacation days. David had found himself thinking about Sarah's question. When had they stopped being curious about each other? He'd started paying attention to other couples, the way they asked follow-up questions about each other's days, how they made space for both people to talk, the visible effort they put into staying connected despite busy lives. He'd also started noticing his own patterns. How he asked, "How was your day?" like a checkbox to tick rather than because he genuinely wanted to know. How he shared work stories that positioned him as the hero or victim rather than exploring his actual feelings about situations. How he treated their relationship like a stable foundation he could take for granted while he built everything else on top of it. The hardest part about being here isn't the loneliness, though there is some of that. It's realizing how much I'd shrunk myself to fit into the shape of who I thought you needed me to be. I became someone who didn't ask for attention, who managed problems instead of sharing them, who celebrated quietly so as not to interrupt your important work. I don't think you asked me to become that person, but I don't think you noticed when I did. David set the letter down for a moment, overwhelmed by the truth of her words. He thought about the woman he'd married, vibrant, opinionated, full of dreams she'd shared freely and passionately. When had she stopped talking about those dreams? When had he stopped asking about them? He tried to remember the last time he'd asked Sarah what she wanted. Not just what she needed or what would make their household run more smoothly, but what would bring her genuine joy. The answer was devastating in its absence. "I'm dating someone. His name is Michael, and he teaches art at the community college here." That's not why I'm writing. I'm not trying to hurt you or make you jealous. I'm telling you because it's helped me understand what I was missing in our marriage. Not passion or excitement or newness, but curiosity. Michael asks me questions about my paintings because he's genuinely interested in my creative process, not because he's trying to be supportive. He remembers details about my day because he was actually listening when I shared them. David felt a sharp pain in his chest, not just jealousy, but recognition. Sarah was describing the kind of attention he gave to his most important clients: deep interest, careful listening, genuine investment in outcomes. When had he stopped treating his wife with the same professional courtesy he showed to people who paid him? He thought about his assistant, Margaret, who knew his coffee preferences, his schedule conflicts, his stress patterns. She remembered details about his preferences because her job depended on it. When had Sarah's emotional needs become less important to him than Margaret's professional ones? I don't tell you this to be cruel, but because I want you to understand that what was wrong between us wasn't just about time or priorities. It was about presence. Michael works full-time and takes care of his elderly father, so he's busy too. But when he's with me, he's actually with me? He doesn't check his phone during dinner or interrupt our conversations to take calls. Not because he has fewer obligations, but because he's made a choice about how to be present with people he cares about. David walked downstairs to the kitchen, still holding the letter, and looked at the table where he and Sarah used to eat breakfast together in their early years. He tried to remember when he'd started reading emails during meals, when he'd begun treating their shared time as an opportunity to multitask rather than connect. The house felt different now that he lived alone in it, bigger and smaller at the same time. He'd hired a cleaning service because he'd never realized how much work Sarah did to maintain their domestic life. He'd started grocery shopping and cooking simple meals, discovering that he actually enjoyed the meditative aspect of preparing food when he wasn't rushing to get back to work. I want you to know that I hope you find happiness. Real happiness, not just professional success or financial security, but the kind of happiness that comes from being fully present in your own life. I hope you find someone who appreciates your intelligence and drive, but who also helps you remember that there's more to life than achievement. I hope you learn to be curious again about yourself, about other people, about experiences that don't advance your career but expand your heart. 3 months ago, David had started seeing a counselor, not to get Sarah back, but to understand how he'd become someone who could lose the most important relationship in his life without even noticing it was slipping away. Dr. Reynolds had helped him recognize that his work addiction wasn't just about ambition or providing for his family, it was about feeling competent and valued in a world where success was measurable and feedback was immediate. Relationships require a different kind of intelligence. Dr. Reynolds had told him, professional success rewards focused attention and goal achievement. Relationship success rewards presence and emotional availability. You can't apply business metrics to love. I also want you to know that I forgive you, and I hope you can forgive me. We both participated in the slow dissolution of our marriage, and we both made choices that prioritized other things over our connection. I should have spoken up sooner instead of building resentment. You should have noticed sooner that I was disappearing, but we were both doing the best we could with the tools we had at the time. David thought about forgiveness, both giving and receiving it. For months, he'd been angry at Sarah for leaving, at himself for not seeing the signs, at his job for demanding so much, at life for being more complicated than he'd expected. But lately, especially since starting therapy, he'd begun to understand that their marriage hadn't ended because either of them was a bad person. It had ended because they'd stopped tending to it, stopped nurturing the curiosity and attention.